Hello, Biz Catalyst 360 and Northern Lights Publishing welcome you to RoundTable 360 with your host and moderator, Joseph Carabas. RoundTable 360 brings together people in the creative fields, dancers, thespians, poets, actors, musicians, authors, and others from across the globe in conversation about things that are relevant, irrelevant, serious, and fun. Today's episode is Schadenfreude German for Casper the Friendly Ghost? If humor is subjective, what makes funny funny? And is led by author, humorist, and psychologist Peter Desberg. Today's guests include scriptwriter, dramatist, and poet Kenneth Weene, EU-based actor, voice artist, and model Sabine Rossbach, editor, publisher, and award-winning poet Clarabelle Miray Fields, senior A. Soloway IP attorney and expert on AI and U.S. law Todd Sullivan, and a host of others. Stay with us and enjoy.
Hi, folks. Welcome to Roundtable 360. I'm a pigeon, but I go by the moniker Ken. And today I have brought one of my favorite statues with me. His name is Dr. Peter Desberg. He writes fairly funny stuff sometimes, and he knows a lot about comedy. He's a psychologist who works out in the Hollywood area, which already makes everything he says suspect. He's got a few books, one of which is Now That's Funny, that he wrote with another friend of mine, Jeffrey Davis. Anyway, we're going to talk about humor today. And Peter, why don't you tell us a little about what's funny?
Oh, well, that's an easy place to start, isn't it? Interestingly, we did a book where we interviewed Hollywood comedy writers. And one of the fellows we interviewed was named Elliot Schoenman, who was the showrunner for Maude. I don't know if you remember the TV show Maude. And he said to us, comedy writers don't think like other people. Let me give you an example. My father committed suicide by jumping off a bridge in New York. So, pretty awful. About a year later, he said, I called my sister and I said, let's take a cab to the bridge where our father jumped off, just to sort of emotionally purge what would happen. And as he's riding in the cab, he says to himself, my father was a German Jew and kind of cheap. I wonder how much he tipped the cab driver on the way to his suicide. It's a very different way to look at life. Is there anything particular you'd like me to talk about? Because I can bore people on a number of subjects.
Well, why don't we start with, why do you try to be funny? Notice I said try.
I noticed that right away, and it's easy for me because I'm surrounded by mirrors at home. So not much of a problem. It's a weird term to say try to be funny, because immediately it starts to make you feel like then you ain't gonna be. But it's, can I use the F word here?
Of course you can.
Okay. Freud wrote a book about humor. And one of the things that he talked about was that the basis of humor is hostility. And that it's a very nice, easy way to, if I want to punch you in the face, I'm considered a bad person for doing that. So if I'm not liking you, I could say, we know why your mother named you Joseph, because she didn't know how to spell. Now, not that funny of a joke, and I'll admit that right off. But what's interesting about it, Freud didn't put it quite this way, but he said, how many people does it take to sort of make a joke? And he said, 3. you need the joker, you need the butt of the joke, but the most important part is the audience. If the audience laughs, you got away with it and it was hostile. But if they say, oh man, that was not cool. You hurt the guy's feeling. Hey. Then all of a sudden it becomes really naked and everybody knows what happened.
So one of the things you have to do is you have to pick your butt carefully.
Yes, you must pick your butt carefully. And they have all sorts of lotions apparently that help you with that now. But it's kind of interesting that when he talked about comedy, he said the bulk of it is hostility, but there's also something else. He said Freud was a huge student of history, and if those of you that know about his life know that he constantly had a conflict between the life and death instincts. And what was interesting is he said, it's too depressing for me to think that all humor is based on hostility and meanness. There's got to be some kind of force that isn't that. And he came up with the idea that there's a thing called harmless wit. And what he said is, this is comedy not based on hostility. It's also not very funny. And he said it's more a question of like being clever than it is being funny. The example he gave was puns. You know, if you heard a funny joke, you might say to a friend, hey, come here, listen, I got a great joke for you. But you'd never want to say, hey, I was engaged with a girl with a wooden leg, but she broke it off. Nobody can love me like my old tomato can. Everybody in America drove a pink car, we'd be a pink carnation. You don't get laughs with stuff like that, or at least not if everybody is sober.
You get groans.
At best, yes. But what fascinates me is the people that are really good at creating it. And we're all wondering, like, what's the magic? Where does it come from? Is there a formula? And when you talk to comedy writers, they just need to pull stuff out of nowhere. But I was interested in how many of them were honest with me and said, what we do a lot of is called joke switching, where you take a joke in one area and you just make it fit another one. I'll give you an example. One of the oldest radio jokes was Jack Benny, who created his reputation of being cheap. And he had the classic line, in radio, you absolutely couldn't have dead airspace. Why am I feeling guilty when I say that? He said you couldn't have dead airspace, and yet one of his famous lines was, I'm walking through a dark alley, a man comes up, pulls a gun on me and says, your money or your life. I said, hey, I'm thinking. Broke everybody up, but 30 seconds of dead airspace, hard to think of. But I've seen that joke used on Big Bang. I remember an episode of Roseanne where the doctor said to her, look, you've had 2 kids with natural childbirth. It was really painful. You don't have to go through all that pain. We can give you an injection and spare you the grief. But there could be complications if you do it. Do you want to? I'm thinking, you see the same jokes come up over and over and over.
Peter, I'm hearing as you're telling these jokes, if any of our panel would like to share one of their jokes or ask you something about jokes, or maybe talk about why they try and tell jokes, because we want to have a little participation here.
It's absolutely welcome. And let me warn you that if you don't, I'll continue talking.
Anybody have anything they'd like to share? Goodness, none of you try and be funny.
Amy, go for it.
Go for it.
Well, I'll be the first to admit that I have a quirky sense of humor. And when my kids were very young, they thought it was funny, but of course when they were teenagers, nothing I said was funny or interesting at all. And so whenever I would say something that was funny, they'd always say, "Mom, you're not funny." And I was like, "I know, only intelligent people think I'm fun, but understand my humor."
Nice.
and so they eventually stopped saying I wasn't funny.
I like it. I like it.
Sabine?
Anything that can slow them down is wonderful. But
My micro. Yeah, now you can hear me, right? Yeah, I was wondering, I recently watched a Netflix series called The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I'm not sure if you've heard about that.
wonderful.
Exactly, thank you.
I saw all 5 seasons.
Oh, same here, yeah. From the beginning to the end. I really loved it. And I think that gave me a real insight into also the making, so to say, of humor, because at some point she's part of this writers group, a group of people who write jokes for a TV host, right? Now, Peter, I wanted to ask you, have you done this writing? Have you been part of a writing group, writing for a host or for a particular show?
I've not done much in the way of TV writing. I've written a bunch of joke books, and if you hold them to your ear, it sounds like the ocean.
How come?
That's called a bad joke.
Okay.
It's also good to help people who have trouble sleeping.
Okay. I see. Okay.
But I thought what might be interesting for you guys, if you'd be up for it, since we were talking a minute ago about joke switching, is for me to give you a little bit of an exercise on how it works. And I'll do it with probably the world's oldest joke. And it's made sadder by the fact that it's a New York joke. And if you watched the World Series last night, they got to be one. A tourist goes up to a New Yorker and says, "How do I get to Carnegie Hall?" And you all know the answer, right? Somebody say it. Practice. And one of the things that surprised me was sometimes when I talk to students about comedy writing, I use this as an example. And I say, there's 3 ways that you can switch a joke. The first way is you change the setup. So the setup is, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? And I would say to them, now you can see the obvious thing that you do in the setup is you have to look for something that's a place, a location, but it also has meaning for what it is. And then I'd be stunned where they'd say, "Okay, how's this? How do I get to a grocery store?" And no, that only does one, not the other. But try this. Somebody be brave and come up with a setup for using that framework of a joke, where the answer, the joke, the punch is going to be practice.
Well, since
Okay,
we all
good.
we all have all of these great artists here, pick your art form. Like Sabine, how do you get to the Old Vic?
Say that again, please. How do I get to?
The Old Vic Theater.
No idea.
Well, the answer, again, we use the punch, practice, practice, practice.
Practice, practice, practice. Mhm.
So, you know, how do I get to Dodger Stadium? Practice, practice, practice. How do I get to Yankee Stadium? Don't practice.
Isn't,
So-
excuse me, isn't part of that send up or setup how, this person's in New York, they walk up to somebody carrying a violin or a cello or something. Figure, well, that's a musician. They would know how to get to Carnegie Hall. If someone wanted to get to Dodger Stadium, Yankee Stadium, whatever, they walk up to somebody carrying a glove and a baseball bat, wearing a uniform. Wouldn't that be more of the setup?
No, because in the classic version of it, a tourist walks up to a New Yorker and says, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? Because you figure that's such a famous place, everybody would know it.
I think that we have a cultural difference here. Joseph, you're not a New Yorker by trade. And Peter, even though you're in California, you're a New Yorker by trade.
You can
Right?
tell by the way I talk. Yeah, sure.
If you're a New Yorker by trade, you're expected to know everything. So no expertise is required.
But wherever you are, if you're in Cleveland and say, how do I get to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, the second way that you can switch a joke is you keep the setup, change the punch. So tourist walks up to a New Yorker and says, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? Sleep with the booking agent. So again, now what you've done is you've kept the same buildup, but you've changed the way you set it up. Let's begin at least with an easier one of something that everybody knows a lot about. Just to get the idea. Then we'll come back and make fun of you, I promise.
Can I ask a quick question here? We're having trouble thinking of whom we want to make fun of or what we want to make fun of.
Or what, yes.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, and this is, I think, very important. Right now, this show is just a week, not even a week, a few days before this major American election. Do you think that people have become less willing to poke fun? Do you think people are more anxious about, I have no trouble being the butt of jokes, but are we getting a little more tetchy, if you would say, about what we say, what we think about, what we think is funny, what we can talk about is funny?
Well, I mean, in this case, I'd flip that and say that people are going, and they're turning themselves into pretzels, trying to make fun of people. And of course, now there's a new added dimension of you can see the trouble you get into because of it. Look at that very clever young comedian at Madison Square Garden. His joke didn't cause much of a stir, did it?
Okay.
But you can see the power of doing it. I wanted to stay away from politics. We can certainly go there, but
since we're an international show, it would be a little bit problematic anyway. But Sabine, you had something you wanted to add in there?
An observation. I realized that from a European point of view, the closer we get to the American elections, the bigger the jokes become. So maybe, and I'm asking myself, does it have something to do with being concerned or with distance?
I mean, that's a great question. I think, again, when
you can see he's been
the thing that leaps to mind when I think of your question is the whole world seems to be afraid of who's going to take over the US because it's going to have potentially such dire consequences. But I don't know if you want to talk about political science. But
Well, yeah, I think though it makes us more anxious. When people are anxious, we tell more jokes to relieve the anxiety, but we're also more afraid of jokes, is what I'm trying to say.
well, certainly telling the wrong joke can do terrible things to your career, to your friendship, to your marriage. Absolutely. And that's again going back to Freud and the idea of the hostility that underlies jokes, because it's a safer way to express your hostility. But again, let me see if I can think of an easy example.
Well, Peter's thinking. Rick, did you have something you wanted to add?
Sure. Going to that Madison Square Garden joke that goes back to what Peter said originally. It depends on the audience. I'm convinced that there are certain small audiences would have thought that was a hilarious joke and would have been laughing and rolling on the ground, laughing. So
if that hadn't been televised and it was just to the Trump audience, it brought the house down. The joke worked really well in that environment. It's just when it escaped the capsule that we started having a problem.
What joke was this?
Puerto Rico being an island of garbage.
Oh, okay.
That little one.
Mm-hmm. And also, Peter, isn't there another kind of joke, an insult joke? Because that seems to be an insult joke. Is that a recognized form of humor? Insult jokes?
Insult
jokes. Insulting someone.
Oh, insulting. Oh, yeah. Well, again, hostility is it. Permit me to go back to Freud again for a minute. One of the things that he said was that you need a certain amount of tension for a joke to be funny. Without enough tension, ain't gonna be funny. Too much, you're gonna go the other way and kill yourself. But there's a sweet spot in the middle that really goes. Permit me to tell you a few jokes where the amount of tension raises a little bit. Here's one with very low tension, so don't feel bad if you don't laugh. And I have no feelings, so never worry about me. Your best friend will not laugh when you tell him a joke until he repeats it. It's cute. It's not hilarious. Let's go a little farther now. A couple is driving through the country. They pass by a farm, and there's a bunch of farm animals. So the wife says to the husband, relatives of yours? And she says, yes, they're my in-laws. You get a little cuter, a little more tension. Not so much. Now, let's go for a little more. A young girl is at her first wedding, and her mom is saying, how are you enjoying the wedding, dear? She says, oh, it's wonderful. Hey, Mom, what does fornication mean? So she's panicked, doesn't know what to say. So he says, I'm going to distract her. Isn't the bride's dress beautiful? Oh, yeah, and look at the veil, but what's fornication? So seeing it's not going to help, she finally says, well, honey, where did you hear that word? She said, I heard the bride saying to the groom, fornication like this, we should have had champagne. A little more. Now, permit me to tell you a side story. I got to be a luncheon speaker, and I'm sitting in front of 500 people talking about developmental psycholinguistics. Always get a laugh with that. So towards the end, I want to try and get a laugh, and I decide I'm going to tell this joke to 500 academics. On one side of me is my dean, the other side, the university president. I tell this joke. The minute I mention the F word and fornication, not a sound in the room. Everybody's, just said.
Mhm.
And then when I told the punch and it wasn't bad, literally the president was slamming his fist down, laughing so hard. And part of it was tension release, but it was the amount of tension. Now, let's go a little farther out on the tension scale. I think good taste is overrated, and I think we had the video to prove it before. A 10-year-old boy walks in on mom and dad engaged in Congress. It's a nice way to say it, even though it sounds political. And dad is on his back, so he's looking straight into the kid's eyes. Mom can't see what's happening. And he doesn't know what to do. He sort of goes like this, and kid runs out the door. The next day, dad comes home, and there's a strange noise coming out of the kid's room, and the kid is having sex with his grandmother. He looks at his dad and says, "Not so funny when it's your mom, is it?"
That's dark.
I like that one.
It's
Yeah,
dark,
yeah,
but
yeah.
even with this tough an audience, just about everybody laughed. Again, I scaled tension for you,
Mhm.
and you can see the difference. And tension is a really slippery slope. Permit me to tell you another in a series of boring stories, because that's all I got. Years ago, I was asked to give a talk on the topic of instructional humor. The person who hires me says, "Look, this is a denominational school. We're a religious campus. So the one thing I ask you is keep everything kind of conservative." Sure. I give the talk. It's an hour and a half talk. It goes great. We get laughs. Everything's fine. I get a call in a couple of days saying, "We really loved your talk. Would you come back and do it again?" Sure. By the way, could you change some of it? Because half the audience will have been in the other group and have already heard it. So put some new stuff in there. Okay. Not the best of conditions, but what the heck, they're paying me. So I go there and I get started. And it's your basic oil painting, not a laugh, nothing. So I'm trying to think on my feet. And I'm fairly new at talking about this particular subject. And so again, I go to, I'm not challenging them enough. I'm not putting enough tension in there. I got to go a little darker. What I didn't realize was I had already pushed this group past its comfort limit. So I tell a joke that for me would be so mild that my friends are, but to this group, picture a convention of 150 asthmatics in a room. And for the next half hour that my talk still had to go, they're just staring at me, very much like you guys here.
Yeah.
I finished the talk, and the guy who hired me walks up to me. Here's my hand. He doesn't look me in the eye, just takes my check, goes like that and walks.
So it is about tension.
Now, the sad part of this is the second it happened, I knew what I should have done. I should have said to this group, now, I know I might have made you a little uncomfortable with this, but see, if I had said to you, don't ever go over the line when you're talking to a group, you would dutifully write it down in your notebooks as another note, and it wouldn't have any meaning. But I thought, if I can actually make this experiential, make it a teaching moment, you'll never forget it. And since this is an academic setting and I'm a professor, it's okay to do it here, understanding the purpose of the exercise. But I didn't have the guts to do that. So I just sat there, boom.
Peter, we have a couple people that make comments. Donna, you've had your hand raised. Luckily, you don't have to hold it up physically in Zoom.
I can. Hi, guys. I just wanted to say that I learned very early that writing humor is the most subjective type of writing there is, period, bar none. And I think that people that make a living at it are very brave. What happened to me the first time I tried was I wrote a 300-word article on how to get rid of a pile of bricks and published it in a very tiny magazine. And I got hate mail from one person who wanted to lock me in a closet. And I thought, well, that's really odd. Why didn't you just criticize my article? Why me personally? And it made me think, well, I'm never going to make humor alone my goal for any piece that I write, because you just never know when it's going to go over. If you know, I have my characters have their own sense of humor, and there's always a good mystery to rely on if you don't think I'm funny. So another instance I will tell you bravely was a dinner party, and the host was telling his own story, and he said he woke up one morning and he just said F. So I turned to his wife and I said, well, was he late for work? And his wife said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, after 3 Fs in a row, wasn't he late for work? Well, the people at the table laughed, all except one. And he said, you know, you're not as funny as you think you are. And I said, I get that a lot. And what I realized was that I was never going to try to make other people laugh. I'm just trying to make me laugh. And if other people enjoy it, great. If they don't, they've got the mystery to rely on. And that's my take on writing humor.
Well, I mean, obviously the very, very first thing you need to know is what your audience is like. But the other thing is, when you work with an audience, you have to get them in a mood where they want to be laughing, which is the most difficult trick that every stand-up will tell you, is how can you get to the point where even silly things work, where the best material won't work if they're not liking you. And it's a real art form to do that.
You get just that right level of tension that they want to laugh. And just that nudge right connection to you so they don't get angry at you for making them laugh.
Well, you know, again, there's certain things we know, like if an audience thinks you're arrogant, you ain't getting a laugh.
Mm-hmm.
And if even worse, if they're all comics have a thing called a saver, which is something to turn to when it's not working. There's nothing worse for a stand-up than to be up there, tell a joke, and it absolutely dies. Then the audience is looking at you like, oh, that poor guy. He must feel terrible. Kiss of death. They will never laugh at another thing you say.
Well, yeah, and we got other people who have things to say. And Rick, you haven't said anything yet, but I see that your hand is up. So why don't you join in?
Okay, actually I did, but thank you, and I'll make it very short. I am really happy we're having this conversation about humor, because at first I thought, well, unless you're Mark Twain or somebody, what's the point of this? But talking about it and hearing Peter talk, it occurs to me the obvious. Humor is actually part of humanity. An example that jumps out at me is one of the greatest war movies, Patton. There's a number of parts in there where you're just laughing out loud. Like when Montgomery says, relax, Patton, I shan't kiss you. And then when, the movie begins, some private guard is sleeping on the ground and Patton starts kicking him, and his aides hear the guard yell, who the hell's kicking my ass? And they run out, to stop a fight. And Patton goes, what are you doing down? Someone says, what are you doing down there? He goes, well, I was trying to get some sleep. And Patton says, get back down there, son. You're the only son of a bitch in this outfit who knows what he's doing. I mean, this is a war. People are being killed, but you end up laughing at those things because they're funny. And having read the book, they were all true also. And again, as Peter mentioned, lots of what made that funny was the tension. and especially when Patton has to apologize for slapping the privates. He says, "I'm standing up here so all of you people can see if I'm as big a son of a bitch as you all think I am." And everyone starts laughing. And the audience in the movie starts laughing because it was exactly what was that tension that made that all funny.
Absolutely. And I mean, I can tell you as a psychologist, you've just given a beautiful description of the law of contrast.
Yeah.
And that same thing might not have gotten a laugh if it was a comedy, but with all that tension around, oh yeah, that's going to work way better.
And the last thing I'd say, and then I'll lower my hand, is
Oh, please.
the first thing I wrote that I told Joseph was a humorous narrative poem, the true story of Rub-a-Dub-Dub, 3 Men in a Tub. But the novel that I wrote, still unpublished, I have a little bit of humor in there. And one of the humorous things is a fist fight at a war council. And it just seemed the right thing to do. But humor is really a part of humanity. And even in the most serious things, there is room for a little bit of humor. Don't want to overdo it, but there's always room. So thank you very much, Peter, for making this all clear.
And absolutely, no, it's a really good point. And it's very strange how if people like you, they're going to laugh more at what you do. If you watch the best comics, all my favorites are incredibly good at self-effacing humor. I don't know if you folks are big Jon Stewart fans. I'm only 5'10", but I consider myself a big fan. And all he does is make fun of himself. But he does it so artfully that you have to like this guy as you've got tears coming out of your eyes.
Sabine, I think, no, you had your hand up before, but I'm going to ask Amy first because I don't think she's had a
Sure.
chance.
Sure.
Amy?
So you were talking about like the situations or something. So when I was in college, we were actually on a cruise ship for spring break, and we went into the middle of a hurricane. Well, it was like the outskirts of a hurricane.
Oof.
And if anybody's ever been on a cruise ship, like that 95% of the people were senior citizens, and the other 5% of us were college students on spring break. And the waves were so bad on this big ship. They had barf bags every 10 feet everywhere you went. But it wasn't bothering me. And like if you sat on a bar stool, it would spin around by itself. So I took great amusement in having a couple of drinks and putting my feet up so I could spin around on the bar stool. And we were very limited. We weren't allowed to pull into any of the ports. They had, limited resources of what we could do. And one of the things we were allowed to do was go in to see a show, and they had a magician there. But there's a lot of fearful senior citizens there who may or may not already walk okay. So being subjected to a ship doing this was probably pretty fearful for them, and the nausea and the headaches and everything that went with it. So we have this whole room jam-packed with senior citizens who were completely not amused by the magician. So they asked for a volunteer, and all of my friends volunteered me to go up. And everything that he wanted me to participate in, I physically couldn't do. He would, hold your arm out. I couldn't hold my arm out. Hold your foot up. I can't hold my foot up. Do this and this and that. I physically couldn't do any of the things. And so he went with the flow, and his magic show turned into a comedy show. And everybody in the room was in complete laughter the entire time. Like, his magic rings were all over me, and I had to hold on to microphones to stand up. And so it changed a whole room full of people being very fearful and nauseous into everybody laughing and having a really good time.
The joy.
It's a great example of if they like you, it's much easier to get laughs. Mm-hmm. And the trick is, how do you get people to like you? I've been working on that for years. So far, hasn't. I want my money back. Hasn't worked. But for other people, yeah, it's an incredible thing. You know, you feel empathy for the guy at that point. And the toughest thing, again, I've worked with I like to tell boring parts of my life, so I'll share another with you. As a psychologist, I only deal with people who have stage fright. Not how to get it, but how to deal with it. And again, when I work with stand-ups, oh my goodness, they are so scared because it's so easy to lose an audience. And you can be doing 5 great jokes, you insult the audience with the next one, and it's over. Or you bore them, or you make them angry, or it's a scary thing. You know, I started to say before that every comedian is trained to have a saber, something that because I would do a lot of public speaking. If I went in to talk at a dinner and then me talking, or lunch and me talking, I would first of all have a bunch of pieces of paper in my pocket. So if I tell a joke and it doesn't work, I immediately reach into my pocket, crumble it up and throw it away. Is that really funny? No, but it breaks the tension right there and it gets them past it. Or I would use, I found using terrible puns and getting people to groan. Hey, I don't really like luncheon speaking. I'm just in it for the bread. You go, oh. What they don't realize is, hey, you're not saying, oh, this poor guy, his joke didn't work. He must feel so terrible because I've distracted them. Because again, the kiss of death is staring at people who you've insulted or just boring. You know, I'm looking at the faces on the screen here. Great example.
Sabine, I know you have something, but I was wondering while you're talking, if you'd address whether you like doing comedy or serious drama or what more. And Peter, I should tell you, Sabine is an actress, film and stage actress. Quite good one, by the way.
You're asking if what I'd like to do better?
Yes.
I wouldn't want to miss neither. There's no, I have to have both.
Great.
Absolutely. Whereas but I can say that to play comedy, be it on stage or on camera, is a lot harder. Is a lot more fine-tuned, is a lot more technically challenging. Because you really have to, the concentration levels are extremely high. You have to get your timing spot on. It's and that's what I like about it. It's a challenge, yeah. And especially on stage, because you can't repeat.
Oh yeah, it's incredibly difficult.
And I love to play these. For example, on what I love best in comedy is to play the real underdog. And why? Because that's the one who gets all the sympathy, just like Peter was saying. Yeah, this is just so good. I made this experience with Dr. Einstein in Arsenic and Oatlace on a very big classic. That was he carried so much sympathy, so much love from the audience. That's yeah, and I love these characters because I am allowed to take them so seriously. I mean, really serious. That's great about comedy. Yeah.
Oh yeah, if you're playing a character that is very emotional, the jokes work so much easier because they're not sitting there waiting for the next joke to evaluate it to say, well, up or down. And
yeah.
it comes kind of as a surprise.
But I have to say also, especially if with the immediacy of acting on stage, there is a lot of tension. If you play comedy, there's a lot of, with a big cast, with a lot of technically difficult scenes where timing is crucial, where I don't know, that the tension amongst the cast, us actors, is very high until the first laugh, the second, the third laugh comes up, obviously, and then it's running all by itself.
Well, again, audiences play such an interesting role. That's why I think, again, doing comedy theater is very difficult. Doing stand-up is near impossible. And when you talk to stand-ups, they say, first 5 years is just throwaway because you're learning your craft and it's so difficult. And it's really when you get to about 10 years of experience that you really do it and you understand why it's so difficult.
And then if you're lucky, you have a few years before everybody's learned your jokes and they're all trying to one-up you.
Well, that's an interesting point, that comedy is going through a really difficult time right now because of YouTube. I have a friend who does a stage kind of comic act combined with magic. And she will not let herself be videoed. And she's been doing the same act for close to 20 years, the same 15 minutes. If you see it, it's absolutely brilliant, but she hadn't changed it. But today, people walk into a comedy club with their cameras and, to develop 5 to 10 minutes of material of good stand-up takes months and months and months. And all of a sudden it's up there on YouTube and the whole world's seen it. And now you need all that new material.
And what's worse, the whole world is doing variations of it. And then some people start saying, well, you copied that.
Well, again, people switch the jokes, but keep the essence of it. And every
That's why I say they're brave.
Hey, Peter, we have an interesting question in the chat room. It's from Amy, and she wants to know what is your occupation, but I'm going to start by answering that. Peter is particularly well known in Hollywood and in show business because he specializes in working with people who have stage fright. That is his actual specialty. And from what I know of him, through the grapevine, he actually does it pretty well. He actually helps people. He also writes, of course, and we mentioned some of his books. Now That's Funny is one. His latest book, though, is a novel, and I promised him I'd mention it if he didn't. It's called Let's Send Him to America, and it's kind of a interesting read about a young man from China who was sent to America to get rid of him. And we were talking politics before. It's for politics and about prejudice, but it's also got some good fun. And if they ever make a movie out of it, they're going to need somebody like a Buster Keaton or somebody to play the hero.
There's a lot of physical comedy in it.
Yeah,
and we're actually working on the screenplay. But just a quick plug for those of you that know or don't know about it. Everybody who studied a little bit of history knows about the Jim Crow era. One thing they don't know is that the Chinese people had almost the same experience here, and it's not over either. And some statistics, which of course, what's funnier than statistics? But in 1890, California had a population of 500,000 people, of which 150,000 were Chinese men. Not just Chinese, but just men. They were brought over to work the railroads and the mines, and then all of a sudden, played out. But there's still 150,000 men here, didn't know the language, didn't know the customs, couldn't do anything, and were fighting with people for the lowest level jobs, and they were treated horribly. The government made laws against them. It was terrible. The title of the book comes from the fact that a very wealthy, powerful Chinese man wanted to punish somebody long and hard, so he said, let's send them to America.
Now, you promised me you weren't going to plug, so I'm going to stop. And I'm going to tell you, there's a follow-up question, which is, What are the main components and origins of stage fright? And I think, Joe, I don't know about you, but that sounds to me like it would be a fascinating topic. And maybe Sabine, maybe could you possibly at some time coordinate that one, lead that, moderate that discussion for us with, maybe you can either invite Peter back or somebody else you'd like to have come back and let's talk about it. Because I don't know about you, Joseph, but I think I'd love to know that. And I'm not even an actor, but I'd love to know more about stage fright.
You know, it's funny that Jerry Seinfeld has a line where he says, fear of dying is number 5 on the list. Fear of public speaking is number 1. He says, the next time you're at a funeral, know that most people would rather be in the casket than delivering the eulogy. I think it's a very funny line. But yeah, sure. I will warn you that I will plug one of my stage fright books if I do that. But otherwise, I'd love to do it. It's a favorite topic. And again, I like it because it touches almost everything else in the world.
Well, let's when we get together to meet next time as a panel, we can talk about that as a possible topic, if that's okay with you, Joseph.
But again, you know, with comedy, if you tell a joke and you look uncomfortable telling it, it ain't gonna work. It's terrible. What there's a really interesting concept called self-handicapping, where people get up on stage and whatever it is they're about to do, they begin by saying, you have to forgive me, I'm really nervous about doing this. And the mistaken thought is that when you finish, they'll come up to you saying, you weren't so bad, that was fine. Not what happens. The research shows the minute you say, hey, forgive me, but I'm really scared doing this, first thing they do is they will look at, usually it's your hands. We see a little tremor. Can I see it in your throat? Are you swallowing a whole bunch? And I'm listening really carefully for any signs to show me you're nervous. Why? Because you told me you were. And now I'm interested to see how much. Worst thing in the world you can do. There's research on performers, the way you walk on stage. If you're confident or you look scared, they've done studies where if any of you have ever gotten to sit in a room where they bring audiences in to test sitcoms, and you got these 2 dials, and basically is it funny? You go that way. If it's not funny, you go this way. So they use these to say, are you liking this performance or not? The ones that came on kind of scared and timid, for about 4 or 5 minutes, it depressed the whole performance. When you're feeling sorry for somebody,
You can't laugh.
kills their evaluation of you. It's the worst thing you can do. Yeah,
Joseph,
you must have some tremendous stories about people who get on stage and go up on their lines. And oh my God, you know, if the audience senses it, scary business.
Joseph, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah. A couple of things. I'd be curious to know how humor gets played out across various media. You know, we have Sabine, who's an actor, and we have Sarah, who's a visual graphic artist, media artist. We have Todd, who's an attorney. There got to be a lot of jokes in the attorney field. But also, you know, to what you were just saying, I kind of wonder how that goes against or goes with people like Andy Kaufman and I believe his name is Emo Phillips. I don't know if anybody is still doing performance art per se nowadays. It was a very big thing for a while.
Emo Phillips is one of my heroes.
Okay, so I did get his name right. Okay.
Can I tell a quick Emo Phillips joke? Only because I tell it to every patient that I work with.
Please do.
He says, I'm walking down the street. I look down, I see a wallet. I pick it up, open it up, and there's $150 in cash. I want to do the right thing. So I think, if it was my wallet, what would I want them to do? I think I'd want to be taught a lesson. That's the way I explain rationalization to people. We can make anything be okay with a good rationalization. And Andy Kaufman was an absolute wild man. And I had the privilege of having a 2-hour argument with him. I had a friend who was doing a TV show with him, brought him over, and he was enthralled with wrestling and thought it was the best form of entertainment going. And years before, I got addicted to watching roller derby on television. And we had a 2-hour argument, dead serious, like it was the most important topic, about which was more enthralling and entertaining, roller derby or wrestling. And he never broke character, he never stopped. He was that intense.
How do you categorize the humor of someone like Andrew Dice Clay? Or do you even consider that humor?
No, I absolutely do. And again, he's a hero. When cognitive psychologists, which is basically the way I was trained, look at what's the essence of humor psychologically, it's uncertainty reduction. And some people can do it with a knock-knock joke. Andy Kaufman can do it with changing from his foreign man voice to his Elvis impersonation, and just catches you by surprise. And it's something that you don't expect to see. Interestingly, I have a friend who is I shouldn't start that way because by now you've gotten to know me enough to think I don't believe he has friends. But I know a guy who I worked with for a couple of years who's a stand-up coach in Santa Monica. And we're almost finished with a piece of interactive software that teaches people how to create jokes. You can teach joke writing. It's different than comedy, but the actual nugget of telling a joke is something that's finite, it's learnable. And the interesting thing is that the essence of it, pardon another detour, but being an academic, I also study humor. And I've given papers at the International Humor Conference. It is the most hysterical thing you can ever go to. Nobody there has a sense of humor. They study it as if they were studying the pancreas and talk about it that way. But anyway, so there is a formula for writing jokes, and the psychologists talk about uncertainty reduction, but in comedy, it's called the two-story theory of humor. And it's really very simple. Permit me to tell you one of the oldest, but fortunately shortest jokes ever. A man's wife runs away with his best friend. And he says, "Boy, I miss him." Again, the first story is, you must feel so terrible losing your wife. So then the new story has to fit with the old story, but be a total surprise. And if you've ever watched a magician, that's everything they do. I take this coin and I wave this hand around so I distract you until I pull the coin out of your ear. And any kind of joke. When I told you that terrible joke, "Oh, those your relatives?" "Yeah, my in-laws." The story went one way and then the punch went the other way. Even with the dad walking in on grandma and his son, I distracted you one way to make the other way work. And everything is a matter of surprise. No surprise, not much of a laugh.
Amy, you have your hand up again, so please.
I'm sorry?
I said, Amy has her hand up again, so please.
Yes.
Well,
love the fact
I
that
put it
can-
in, I put it in the chat, but Joseph asked me to raise my hand. I was just wondering how you encourage people to use humor to overcome adversity. Do you have like a little,
no, that's a
you have a little
great
theory, a little
well, no,
thing?
it's a great question because it's a double-edged sword. When I work with people who are depressed, you know, a group like this, where you can see they're really hurting. I don't want to use humor there. It's the worst thing I can do because I'm saying, I don't take your situation seriously. And to me, it's just, ha, ha, ha. So you have to be very careful there. And you can use humor in very interesting ways. In other words, I like to use humor as an instructional tool. I gave you the example with Emo Phillips and the wallet. So it was a joke, but it really taught a very important principle. And so again, depending on the way you use it, can change things very much.
Would you use examples if you had gone through the same adversity? Like if you were making fun of yourself, but you were making fun of like a lady in another group that I'm in. She's a cancer survivor, so she feels that she can make fun of the things, you know, some of the symptoms from cancer because she's not making fun of the cancer people. She's saying, hey, we do all these crazy things.
Again, if it's about yourself, if you're the target, free reign, you can, yeah. And it's a great thing to encourage. And it's nice if you can get people to see, I hate to use the F word, but funnier version of what's happening to them. But again, you have to be very careful because nothing is worse, certainly in our profession, than working with somebody and having them feel like you're not taking their pain seriously or trying to minimize their pain. That's why Ken is wearing that mask right now, because he's done it that often.
I'm going to just add that if it's in a group, the determination is largely made by the group. And if you want to get a good laugh, really have some good belly laughs, go to an AA meeting sometime. And people will be telling their stories. And hey, let's face it, they're really hilarious stories. But within that setting, where everybody is either in sobriety or in some way connected to the sobriety, the sharing of that humor becomes incredibly powerful.
That's a great example. That's a great example because there, the first thing you have that's a huge advantage is your shared experience with everybody there. Mm-hmm. So the last thing you want is me laughing at you. But if you and I have just been through the same terrible experience, we can share the laugh there because it's an empathic response. We've both had the same terrible experience and hopefully are at least getting better with it, if not being over it. That's a very insightful question. Humor in the one thing I'm curious about is I told you my terrible story about killing an audience with a joke, and I'm surprised that nobody said, "Oh, what was that joke?" Just an observation I made. Now I won't tell you out of spite, but just to let you know, you had your opportunity. It's gone. There's certain moments you just.
Oh. Please tell us, please, please.
You know, when the moment passes. The thing about that joke that was so surprising to me was it was something that I wouldn't tell my friends, that joke, because they go, "Oh, please." It's such a like tiny, tiny little joke that it was the last joke I would think of that could gross out 150 people. But beware of large numbers of religious people in groups. That's the lesson that I took away there.
I've often wondered, you know, seriously, if you think about, oh, I don't know, Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, you know, did they have a sense of humor? And the only one, you know, not that he's the same, but Gandhi had a wicked sense of humor. I know that. But I wonder how many of these other people, you know, had a sense of humor.
I've heard a few anecdotes about Jesus. I've not heard anything about Moses, which is, you know, I mean, what more could you want than the classic Jewish comic? And he had that opportunity. Who knows if he took it or not? But if you watch these evangelists on TV, they will slip jokes in all the time. They're not funny jokes, but they do make attempts at humor, but only as a contrast. And it's a very tiny percentage of what they do. And, you know, given the ratio of how much benefit can you get versus how much damage you could do, that's why a lot of people are scared to tell jokes. And certainly, you know, I work a lot with public speakers. And, you know, we talk about, hey, why don't you open with a joke? And they go, oh no, it could offend somebody, it could not be funny. I've lost them. I won't take that risk.
A lot of times when I talk to people who are into speaking, I find that they're terrified of telling a joke and turning off their audience. Okay, Joseph, you had something you wanted to share.
Actually, Liz has her hand up first, so go ahead, Liz.
I didn't notice that she was.
I just what you were saying about different audiences. One of the things that fascinates me is that the difference between British and American humor. That there's a number of comedy shows that the original was British, but when it gets, they can't just take the original over to America. They have to completely rewrite the script and have different actors and completely change the tone to make it suitable for a US audience. And to me, it seems that the main difference between them is generally American humor is actually kinder, and British humor is a little bit sharper and crueler than American humor. And I just want to go a story about, we have a brand of chips, what we call them crisps in the UK. And this brand are running a commercial with a famous soccer footballer who's a sort of like a national hero to British people. And the whole joke about this commercial was that he was going around stealing the chips, the crisps from people, out of people's crisp packets. Just, you know, he'd go up to them, just take them. And there were some Americans involved in the company and they were really horrified about this and said, we can't do this. Nobody will laugh. It's, you know, he's a national hero. They'll think he's an awful person. He's a thief. And everyone said, and the British people said, no, British people think it's funny. They know it's a joke. They'll laugh. They won't get upset about it. And the American executives really had to be convinced that it wasn't to be a terrible disaster and it would completely ruin their campaign.
Well, we're very conservative here with humor. It's, you know, looking at humor in ads, very, very conservative. And with a few exceptions, TV shows and movies pull back and get censored like crazy. One of the things that I found interesting was here I had this fantastic opportunity to interview 25 of the world's funniest writers. These are all people at the absolute top of their fields, show creators, showrunners, incredible writers. And one of the things I found that I was stunned by was the bitterness they all had towards comedy writing, and particularly movie writing, because a number of them, I was surprised, a number of them have taken up playwriting. They said, I love writing plays because you can't ad lib, you can't add dialogue. You want to change a word, you come and see me. Or he says, when I do a movie, oh my God, I look for anything I've written in the final version because so many people have gone over it and changed it and butchered it. And sometimes I'm just in tears because I think of things that I've written that were so funny and so clever, not a trace, not a whiff of them in there. It's kind of sad. And it's not the recent Writer Guild strike, but the one before. There was a joke going around that I really loved. A writer and a producer are lost in the desert. They're about to expire when they see an oasis in the distance. So they both, on their hands and knees, make for the oasis. And of course, the writer gets there first because he's hungrier. And he dips his hands into the water, and as he's pulling a trembling hand towards his mouth, he sees a stream of yellow liquid going into his hands. Looks up to see the producer peeing into his hands. Says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm making it better." And the writers thought it was hysterical. But again, the arbiters of what's funny and what will offend people. It's you have to be pretty heroic to be a comic. And again, I was so surprised at business people and how unheroic, disheroic, how heroicless they were when it came to like opening with a joke, because what happens if it doesn't work? I said, why would you want to start out with, "Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here today. I'd like to thank so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so for inviting me here. And I've got," you're putting people to sleep. And if you can find a good joke that leads you into what you're doing, it's magical. But the risk reward ratio comes popping up saying, I don't think I want to take that chance.
Well, Joseph, you had something you wanted to say.
Please.
Well, one thing is we're coming up on time, so I want to be sensitive to that. Couple of things. Is there a limit to self-deprecating humor? And the other side of self-deprecating humor, you have somebody like Don Rickles, who, okay, they're attacking me. I'm going to attack them far more than they're able to attack me.
Let me start with self-deprecating humor. Self-deprecating humor is on a real teeter-totter. There's a rule. Self-effacing humor will work for me if it's in an area where I'm very, very confident and the audience knows that I'm very confident. I can make fun of myself all day. But the last thing I want to do is take an area where I'm really scared and start using self-deprecating humor. If I get nervous when I talk and I start making a little joke about being nervous, I'm calling everybody's attention to it. Last thing I want to do. So you got to be really, really confident. And again, the audience likes confident performers. It's the audience, whether they think about it or not. If a performer is not very good, they're kind of thinking, why am I wasting my time here? Why aren't you good enough to be on that stage? If you're not, why are you doing this? And good self-effacing humorists, they're great at doing that. But again, it should serve a purpose, and it should be in an area of your skill. Now, the minute you mention Don Rickles, you're back to the F word. If any of you know about him, Don Rickles has memorized every insult joke there is, and he makes up almost nothing on the spot. He'll walk into a showroom in Vegas with 1,200 people, and there will be a man wearing a bright red blazer. And surprise, he has a bright red blazer joke. And wow, how did he come up with that? So whatever it is, that's part of his act. People that know him say he's the nicest person you'd ever meet. But insult humor, again, the minute that you make fun of somebody's weakness, it says more about you than it does about them. And if people are looking for a reason not to like you, you've just said, here's my gift to you. Now you can hate me. I'm a terrible person.
Yeah,
But if,
it's one
again,
thing to tell a joke about a red blazer and somebody who's calling attention to himself. It's another thing to tell a joke about somebody who has trouble walking and needs to use a walker.
But again, if somebody is really overweight and Don Rickles sees that person, he will make fun of it. And if, it doesn't matter what it is. If he has a long beard, he's got a long beard joke. But the amazing thing is the way the audience looks at it is, wow, this guy is so quick. He can just pick people out and make fun of anyone. No, he's memorized 3,000 insult jokes, and he knows how to call them up when he sees what the topic is.
Fascinating. We are coming up on time, and I'm going to take this moment to thank you, Peter, for this discussion. Ken, thank you for leading the discussion. Folks, thank you for tolerating the wonderful intermission we had there. That was, that was good.
Well, you're giving everybody a story to tell, please.
Yeah, really. Hopefully when we post this on YouTube, you'll all be there going, wow, what he didn't put into this finished product. You should have seen it. It had us. So thank you all.
Everybody's a critic.
Only if you pay attention to it.
You have to have a heck of an ego not to, but okay.
Thank you all. Have a great day. Look forward to seeing you next time around.
And just a quick thank you to all of you. Great questions, great attention. You made me feel comfortable, which is very difficult to do.
Well, we hope to have you back, Peter. Thanks for being here today, and hope to see you again. Thanks, everyone.
And tell us that joke next time.
Yes.
Yeah. Bye.
If you request it.
Hey, Carl.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching RoundTable 360, where creatives from diverse fields and across the globe gather to discuss what's relevant, irrelevant, serious, and fun. RoundTable 360 is brought to you by Biz Catalyst 360 and Northern Lights Publishing. Our shows are taped the last Thursday of every month at 7:30 a.m. Hawaiian time, 10:30 a.m. Pacific time, 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, 6:30 p.m. London time, 19 hours 30 minutes Central European Standard Time, and whatever time that converts to, wherever you are. Please join us at http://nlb.pub/roundtable. That address is on your screen. See you next time, and until then, stay well and safe.